All of you who are already signed on, I want to let you know we're going to wait just a minute or two and let everyone else trickle in. Thank you for bearing with us. We'll be starting soon. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's about 2-3 minutes after the hour, and we still have people signing on, but we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michael Gray. I'm Legislative and Policy Counsel with the Treatment Advocacy Center. We're going to talk about the IMD exclusion to Medicaid today. And I think to the delight of most of you, I'm not going to bore you with the background this time. This is an issue that advocates and policymakers who are in our world, the world of advocating for better treatment laws for severe mental illness. This is something that you folks already know the topic. So we're going to update you on what's going on around the country and in Washington, D.C. on this very important issue. So bear with me just a moment. I will share my screen. Okay. All right. So again, update on the IMD exclusion. We're going to talk about what's going on at the federal level, what's going on at the state level, and what you all as advocates can do to impact that work to increase access to inpatient psychiatric treatment. As you know, the IMD exclusion means that Medicaid will not pay for treatment in a psychiatric hospital with more than 16 beds. And that, as we all know, is a problem. So, federal level, what's going on? There's a bill in the current Congress, the 117th Congress. That's the congressional session that began this calendar year and will end next calendar year. There is a bill, HR 2611. It's sponsored by Representative Grace Napolitano, California, has a list of co-sponsors there. We're going to talk more about those co-sponsors in just a little bit. But for right now, I want you to know that bill would repeal the IMD exclusion. The IMD exclusion is in federal statute. The only way to strike language from a federal statute is by Congress repealing the language, passing a piece of legislation that says that paragraph is gone. And that's what HR 2611 would do. So later on in this webinar, we're going to tell you exactly what you can do to help that bill become law. But for right now, if you don't take away anything else from this presentation, we want you to contact your member of the House of Representatives. Ask them to co-sponsor and support this very important bill. Later on, I'm going to give you more detail about not only how you can do that, but how the Treatment Advocacy Center will help you. We would love to help you do that, help you and your friends and family contact your members of Congress. But yes, and before I forget, Elizabeth Warner, our great communication staff person, has reminded me that people can drop their questions as we go. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but drop your questions as we go. But the big takeaway from this, please ask your member of Congress to co-sponsor and support this thing. We'll explain why that matters later and how you can do it. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. And going to move on here and talk just an overview a bit about the states. What's going on at the state level? State Medicaid departments can seek a waiver to partially get around the IMD exclusion. So far, 6 states plus DC have done so. And there are 6 more that have applied to do so and are waiting from the federal government to see if their waivers will be approved. Now, why does that matter to us when it's not the same as a federal repeal? Again, repeal is the ultimate goal. It's what we should all be working towards and advocating for. And that can only be done by Congress. But in the meantime, your state Medicaid departments can partially alleviate the burden placed on families like many of you who are just trying to get a psychiatric bed for someone with mental illness. You see that list of states. It's an important list of states. I'm looking at the ones that have waivers and have pending waiver applications. It's an important list of states because it shows you this is not a partisan or politicized issue. It simply isn't. When you have a list that includes Vermont and Oklahoma that are seeking the same thing, that lets you know that it's not a red issue or a blue issue. It's an issue that impacts people with mental illness who are not able to get the treatment they need, regardless of where in the United States they live. Same thing for the list of states that have applied. That list includes Massachusetts and Alabama. It's not a red and blue issue. I also included something else on here that you haven't heard us talk about, the Treatment Advocacy Center talk about much in the past, but it's relative, and I'll tell you why. You can also get these waivers, these IMD Medicaid waivers at a state level that are only for substance use disorder or only for mental illness. What we're seeing that's common in the states that have the waiver for severe mental illness is that they also are applying for the substance use SUD waiver at the same time. Why do I bring that up here? Because that list is longer. It's longer, and it's frankly appalling that so many states have obtained a waiver just to get around the IMD exclusion for patients with SUD, but have not sought a waiver for SMI. Now, they had a head start on this. It was a little bit more time they had to apply for the SUD waivers, but it's been 3 years now. It's been 3 years that states have been able to apply for an SMI, severe mental illness waiver, and most of them haven't done it, including most of the states that have an SUD waiver. They already have that waiver. Your state can amend their waiver to have it apply to people with SMI. They can and they should. I was talking to a mother in one of the southern states, southeastern states last week, a woman who, like many of you, has a adult loved one with schizophrenia, and has asked me, what can I do to help my state apply for a waiver? I said, your state already has a waiver, but it only applies for substance use disorder. And she was very upset. She said that was insulting to families who care for someone with SMI. And of course, she's right. In just a moment, we'll get into what you can do to help your state move that process along and get a waiver for SMI, especially if you're one of this big, long list of states that already has a waiver for substance use disorder. Now, I mentioned it's been 3 years. It's been 3 years since these waivers have been available to the states. And we're starting to see some preliminary results. I know in Oklahoma, for example, their length of stay, which is something that the federal government is very concerned about when it comes to spending federal Medicaid dollars on psychiatric care. They want to keep the length of stay under 30 days. Why? Well, money, because money is limited. They can only spend so much, so they say. Length of stay is important, and Oklahoma is keeping really, really good data on this so far on their waiver, their SMI, IMD exclusion waiver, and they have seen their length of stay go up from about 8 days to about 11 days. I know there are some state governments out there who are afraid that if they get this waiver, their average length of stay will be so high that the federal government will take their Medicaid funds for those patients or take that money back. It's simply not going to happen. It simply is not going to happen. What will happen instead is what you see in Oklahoma, a marginal rise in the length of stay, but a really important rise in the length of stay. Those are days that those people were not getting to be in the hospital when they still needed to be in the hospital. They were being kicked out of the hospital, discharged too early because of the IMD exclusion. That's what these waivers can do. And that's why you've got to ask your state to apply for them. And then the financial numbers. I know Vermont has at least one state that has done a full annual report. And the idea these waivers are going to cost a bunch of additional money, simply not the case. Their data shows that is not the case. And again, I'm intentionally bringing up states that are very different socioeconomically, demographically, geographically. Vermont, Oklahoma, different places, seeing the same results. When you waive the IMD exclusion, you get people the care they need. You don't spend a whole lot more government money, but you do save lives. Okay, let's talk about what we can all be doing. I said kind of in passing the last few minutes, you should talk to your members of Congress. You should talk to your state policymakers and get them to apply for these things. Yes, that's true. You should, but how do you do that? How do you do that? Why do you do it? Let's talk about why. Motivation is difficult when it comes for grassroots advocates like so many of you. Motivation is difficult because it takes so long. Legislative advocacy takes so long to come to pass. It does. The IMD exclusion has been federal law since the mid-1960s, and ever since, almost since the beginning, people have been trying to repeal it. People saw that it was a bad idea and have been trying to repeal it. And we're getting there. We're building momentum. This is something that legislators on Capitol Hill and their staffs, as well as lobbyists and advocacy organizations and policy organizations like the Treatment Advocacy Center and our allies, we're talking about this. People are talking about it in a way they were not a few years ago. Back in 2014, a conservative Republican member of the House proposed repeal of the IMD exclusion. It did not pass. And now you have a Democrat, Representative Napolitano. Again, not partisan, but also it's been like 7 years, people actively trying on Capitol Hill to get this done. It's not going to happen if we don't help those legislators build momentum. Build momentum. I've talked to several of you one-on-one about this exact thing, about HR 2611 and about whether or not it's going to pass. I can tell you that what we hear is that it's not going to pass very soon. It may not pass in this session. Well, then why are we asking you to contact your members of Congress? Simple, because legislation takes time. Important legislation that saves lives and makes a difference takes more than one session to get done. The long-term impact of your advocacy now is that we will eventually repeal the IMD exclusion. And I shouldn't just say now. So many of you have been doing this work since 2014. The first time the most recent time this really had a real chance of passage, and way before that. The struggles that families face and individuals face with SMI is long-term, it's lifelong, and unfortunately, so is the time frame it takes to pass legislation. So if you contact your members of Congress and you can get them to co-sponsor and put their support behind this bill, let's say that the worst case scenario is that it does not pass in this session. The session ends at the end of calendar year 2022 and the bill doesn't pass. It's going to come back. I can promise you that. Advocates like us are not going to stop pushing this bill on Capitol Hill. And so if it comes back in the next session, you need a bunch of co-sponsors. And the simplest thing you can do when you're asking your legislator to sign on to a bill or support a bill is to remind them that they co-sponsored a bill in the previous session. Say, hey, you sponsored this exact same bill a year ago. Would you please just put your name on it again? So that is why this matters. We hope it'll pass in this session. And if we get momentum, it might. But if it doesn't, we've got to keep it going. We can't just have a little bill with a short list of sponsors. We've got to have a bill with real, solid, documented support on both sides of the political aisle on Capitol Hill. And that's why I've told so many of you that we don't think, at the moment, it doesn't look like it's going to pass right away. But we still have to get after this. And by get, it's a Southern expression. By get after this, I mean, we have to make sure as advocates that we're letting our members of Congress know that we want you to support this bill, put your name on it. And if it doesn't pass, put your name on it next time and ask your colleagues to do the same. So with that in mind, going to help you do that. The Treatment Advocacy Center can help. We have begun, as of today, an email campaign on this exact issue. And for those of you who have not done this, or maybe those of you who have once or twice before, let me show you how easy this is. I'm going to walk you through it. Just a moment, sorry. And okay, bear with me. Wow, I'm having trouble getting out of it. Very sorry. Sorry, got a little technical difficulty here. I'm actually going to drop out of screen share and drop right back in. Here we go. Sorry for the wait. And so now, let me show you how to, I just can't. There we go. Okay. When you get the link from us, I believe we're going to drop it in the chat during the meeting. Get a link from us. And if not, you'll see it if you're on our email list. You'll see this. If you haven't already. You get this form. It explains the issue. Those of you on this webinar already know the issue. Here's a quick summary of it. And we have a message already populated. This email will go to your member of Congress. I'm going to show you how long this takes. Imagine you just open the link. Type in my name. Type in my address. Oops, sorry. So if you were timing me, we're still under a minute. It should come up. It really is all I have to, well, if I can just get this thing to work. There we go. See, it automatically shows you my member of Congress, W. Lesko. If I wanted to, I would add my personal story. I encourage you, all you advocates, to do that. Click in this box, tell your member of Congress why this matters to your family, concise, maybe a paragraph. I'm gonna hit send. Oh, prefix required, of course it does. And done. So I'm a little slow with computers and tech in general, but it took a couple minutes and we're done. Some staffer at Congresswoman Lesko's office will get that email, we'll open it and read it. One email won't make much difference, but if members of Congress are getting a bunch of these, then they start to. Okay, let's talk about social media. Still in the vein of what we can and should be doing to help move this bill and build momentum on Capitol Hill for the repeal of the IMD exclusion. Twitter, be concise. You have a limited number of characters. And for that purpose, we have, let's see, I believe in the chat box here. Oh, let me hide that. Can I do a, sorry, yeah. Gonna need the text. Elizabeth, is that in the chat box, the text for the tweet?
Yep, I just put it in there.
All right, sorry, I'm just not. Take a look. Oh, there it is. There we are. So we have constructed for you what is really the perfect tweet on this topic. Let me grab my gonna open up Twitter. I mean, I say that here. Again, show you how simple this is. We've got the tweet for you. And I'm going to tweet. I don't know if I'm following her, but that's her. It'll come up. I just happen to know mine. Not hard to find out. You're a member of Congress. I mean, in their Twitter handle, going to tweet. I'm gonna drop that. I tweeted. What was that? Less than a minute. The simplest thing. The simplest thing. For those of you on Twitter, and there's something that we can do to help you. If you, the tweet that I just entered, it had a couple of really important things in it. It had a bill number. It had the subject matter, meaning what does the bill do? And it had a couple of really important hashtags. We're using the hashtag, HR 2611, hashtag SMI, hashtag end IMD exclusion. Put that hashtag end IMD exclusion on your tweet and we'll retweet you. The Treatment Advocacy Center has several thousand followers. We will retweet you. This is how you get momentum on Twitter or any social media. Members of Congress and their staff should see many, many, many mentions of one bill, a bill that may not be on their radar, but all of a sudden they see a few hundred people tweeting and retweeting about it. And that's what will happen if several dozen of you do this today, and then we retweet you, and a lot of our allies and friends who are not in this webinar retweet our retweet. People on Capitol Hill will see that. They will. It helps them build momentum. Now, remember on the tweets, include a bill number. Any tweet about any legislation, state or federal, include a bill number. Also, include something about what it does, like end IMD exclusion, because if they just see a bill number, whatever staff person or maybe a member of Congress is going through Twitter on their phone, that they're not going to know, they're probably not going to know what the bill is. There's a lot of bills. So let them know what it does. They'll say, oh, IMD exclusion, I've heard of that before. Oh, SMI, I know what that stands for. And so bill number and the subject matter. That's important. Facebook, obviously a different format, but one thing, if you want legislators and their staffers to read what you post on Facebook, keep it short. The biggest pitfall on Facebook when it comes to passionate advocates like so many of you is that there's not the limit on characters like Twitter. So it's tempting to write a book about very important stories and history and facts and policy stuff, but policymakers don't have time to read all that. Just like many of us don't. They don't either. So keep it short, keep it concise. It can be heartfelt and passionate and still be pretty straightforward. Okay. State waivers. Talk about advocacy at the state level. What does that mean? What does that even mean? Well, a lot of us are familiar with advocating with state legislators. Sure, that's something that many of us do comfortably. And if you have questions about how to work with state legislators, we've done webinars in the past. But reach out to me. My email address will be at the end of this presentation. And reach out to me. It's one of my specialties is how to connect with state legislators and how to effectively communicate with them. What does that mean when it comes to a Medicaid waiver? Well, a state legislature in most states has the power to mandate, to require the State Department of Medicaid to get a waiver. Any waiver, really, if they want to. They have that power. The legislatures off the top of my head, at least Washington State and Utah did that successfully. Came to fruition. They passed a bill saying the state shall apply for this waiver, and they did it. Now they have a waiver. Great. In Iowa, there was a bill this year that did not pass, but it got a lot of attention that would have done that. And it was known the same thing. Louisiana had a bill, didn't pass, but it got a committee hearing. People were talking about it. People, I mean, policymakers, people who can make a difference. They were and other advocates and lobbyists. They're talking about this thing. That's if you do nothing else but that in the short term, that's great. Long term, you're building momentum to get something done. But that's one avenue. However, don't forget that there are people in state government, in fact, thousands of them in each state, who have a lot of power and the ability to make a difference, but who actually don't are not members of the legislature or their staffs. They're in the executive branch, state executive branch, your Medicaid departments. They're the ones who actually apply for these waivers and apply Medicaid funds to the people that we all care about, who need treatment for mental illness. Talk to them. There's nothing wrong with contacting your state Medicaid director. They don't answer, ask a legislator to reach out on your behalf and set up a meeting. Talk to the deputy director. Find someone at your state Medicaid department who will hear you out and say, hey, we don't have a waiver for the IMD exclusion. Why not? Why not? This would save my son's life or my daughter's life or my friend's life or save my life someday. Tell them that. Have a similar conversation you'd have with a legislator. But remember that it's actually simpler if you can convince a state Medicaid director to do this than it would be to convince a legislator to apply, to write a bill and try to pass it. It'd be much simpler just to get your Medicaid department to do it, because they're the ones who send the application to the federal government and get the waiver. Do not hesitate to do that. Directly talking to your Medicaid department. And once again, if you have questions on how to do that, reach out to me. You'll see my email in a minute. And that's just, I'd love to help you with that. The Treatment Advocacy Center has helped other people in other states do that exact thing. So happy to help. How does this tie together? These state waivers, we want repeal at the federal level. Why are we pushing these state waivers? Why do we keep pushing state waivers? A couple of reasons. One, because if you wait for Congress to fix your problems, you might be waiting a while. You have to keep after them, keep advocating with Congress. But a waiver can be obtained in a matter of months for your state. If your state already has an SUD waiver, they just have to amend their waiver. It's an application process, but it's not that difficult for them to do. States have already done it. Your state can too. Also, we need the kind of data I talked about with Oklahoma and Vermont earlier. We need numbers to show Congress that this not only will save lives, but it also is financially sound. I mentioned 2014, a few years ago, more than a few years now, when there was an effort on Capitol Hill to repeal the IMD exclusion that did not pass. The main reason it didn't pass is CBO, that's an agency works for Congress, and they score a bill. They give an estimate of what a bill will cost if it's passed into law, put a massive price tag on IMD repeal. A ridiculous price tag that was not grounded in fact, but they believed it was. And more importantly, members of Congress just need a high CBO score, a high fiscal note, to just abandon support for a bill and say, oh, we'll work on it at the next session. Just kind of brush it aside. It's the only excuse a member of Congress needs to brush off constituents who want them to pass a bill. In other words, a high CBO score in Congress will kill a piece of legislation. That's what happened a few years back. If we have raw data from the states showing cost savings, which we will have, if we have more states with waivers, we'll take that to Congress. And that'll be very powerful ammunition to use in pursuit of IMD repeal. Okay. Now, one more piece. We talked about direct advocacy. We've talked about social media, email campaigns, talking with policymakers, federal and state level. There's another piece, the media piece, and we have an expert on op-eds, letters to the editor, and such things on staff. And Jeffrey's going to speak to you for just a minute. Jeffrey, let me know, and I can switch to the slide with your wonderful letter. Just let me know.
Thank you, Michael. Great presentation. There was a question in the chat. Somebody asked, is social media the only avenue to influence lawmakers and raise awareness about the need to repeal the IMD exclusion? And the answer is no. In addition to social media, you all have two free communications tools at your disposal, op-eds and letters to the editor. Your members of Congress and their staffs read newspapers, national press, and your local hometown newspapers. If you haven't already read and shared Michael's op-ed in The Hill calling for the full repeal of the IMD exclusion, I'm putting it in the chat now, and I highly recommend that you read and share it. Those of you who attended a few months ago my op-ed seminar know that op-eds are hard to write, and they are even harder to pitch. You're looking at 650 to 800 words, and you need to be a recognized authority, and there is a great deal of competition for very limited space in newspapers for op-eds. A far shorter way to do this, a far easier lift and much less competitive, is letters to the editor. Your really only prerequisite or qualification for writing a letter to the editor is that you have read the newspaper in the past 7 days or so. And so I'm going to give you a brief primer on how to write a letter to the editor. I'm going to share with you some of my do's and don'ts, and then we're going to put one up on the screen that I got placed on behalf of the Treatment Advocacy Center only 2 months ago in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I hope that will be helpful to you. And those of you who are interested in attending my op-ed seminar, I'm going to be hosting another one soon, and we'll get that on the calendar. So in terms of letters to the editor, in general, letters should be under 200 words. 150 is the industry standard. And I want you to stay focused on one, or at the very most, 2 main points, and get to the main point in the first 2 sentences of your letter to the editor. If possible, include interesting facts that the reader might not know, relevant personal experience, and any local connections to the issue. For those of you with the ambition to pitch a letter to the new editor of the New York Times, you should know they have their own requirements. For the New York Times, letters should be between 150 to 175 words, and they need to refer to an article that has appeared in the New York Times within the last 7 days. You must also include your home address and phone number so that they can verify that you are who you say you are. If they are interested in your letter, do not send any attachments. So here are 3 of my do's when it comes to letters to the editor. Do pivot from the content in the article you were writing about to the need to repeal the IMD exclusion, even if the article doesn't mention IMD explicitly. As long as you believe that repealing the IMD exclusion is a solution to the problem addressed in the article itself. That is relevant enough. Do include your home address and phone number, and do include your group's name if you are writing on behalf of your organization. And now my 5 mistakes to avoid. Number 1, don't limit yourself to critiquing articles that you've read in the newspaper. A story that reports favorably on your group or issue presents a great opportunity to repeat a key point from the article while adding one of your own. This also helps build the perception of being a positively focused group. Don't exaggerate your points or use hyperbole. One overstatement makes every other point in your letter suspect. Don't insult your ideological opponents. Avoid jargon. And finally, don't use capital letters or bold text to emphasize a word. It will, I can tell you as a former newspaper editor-in-chief, it will not be printed because newspapers follow AP style, and AP style, does not use, words in all caps or bold text or underline. And if you do so, you run the risk that your letter will not even be considered because the copy chief is simply too busy to, alter it for you. And with that, Michael, if you could put up the Philadelphia Inquirer sample. So here you see, I got a prime placement, the first one they ran. What did I do right? Well, first of all, I kept it short. And I opened by immediately referencing a specific article in the Philadelphia Inquirer that ran 72 hours before this letter was printed, okay? The second thing I did was offer a personal reaction to the story. I said it was heartbreaking and all too familiar for those of us who work in SMI policy. And then I added 2 new facts to the story. I talked about Pennsylvania and its dubious history of incarcerating more people with SMI than it hospitalizes. And then I gave another interesting new fact about the fact that a potential solution to the criminalization of mental illness has actually been on the books in my home state since 2018. I then argue that it could help prevent the cycle of repeat incarceration that the article was about. And then I call for the full implementation of AOT statewide. I was able to do all of that in 150 words. And then I even provided some boilerplate about TAC in the byline. So there you see, it's really easy to do. It's free. This took me under 30 minutes and we had prime placement, and there we are calling for these, the implementation of AOT. as a solution to the problem raised by this article, which didn't even mention AOT. And you can do that too with IMD, and I hope you will. Thank you.
All right, Jeffrey, thanks so much for that. Yeah, and as he said, Jeffrey said that I authored an op-ed in the Hill that he dropped in the chat. I encourage you to read it. It's on the topic of IMD exclusion, but what he didn't say is that that would not have been in a major nationwide publication like the Hill had Jeffrey not gotten it placed there. He knows what he's talking about. Listen to what he says, because he's the best I've ever worked with in actually getting stuff into the media. So thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. Very helpful for advocates wanting to know what they can do to build momentum for repeal of the IMD and for initiatives in their own states as well. So wrap up, reminding you what you can do to help with this issue. After this, we'll have some questions, Q&A. I have time for that built in, of course. But before we do that, ask your member of Congress, co-sponsor, and put their support behind HR 2611. We really hope that with enough momentum from advocates like all of you, it will pass soon. If it doesn't pass in the short term, we've got to get more sponsors. Earlier, I showed you a list of sponsors. I don't know if you noticed, they're all from one party. I'm sure anyone who watches 5 seconds or more of news a day knows that these are very politically polarized times that we're living in. Nowhere is that more so than on Capitol Hill. If you want a bill, an important bill, to pass, you need a lot of you need to show that it's nonpartisan. And as I pointed out with the IMD waivers and which states have those waivers, this is not a partisan issue. So even if you are like 8 of the 9 sponsors on the bill, if you are yourself a resident of California and your legislator is also a Democrat, that's fine. All the sponsors we can get are great, but also it would be good to see some Republicans on there, because you want to see, when an issue truly is bipartisan, nonpartisan like this, you want to see bipartisan support for it, to illustrate that point to the colleagues of theirs in the House who don't know much about this issue. And I can tell you from experience that there are people, legislators in both parties, agree with us meaning Treatment Advocacy Center's position on the IMD exclusion. So this is a nonpartisan issue. It should have bipartisan support, regardless of which party your member of Congress belongs to. Fill out the form, the voter voice email campaign form that you're going to see from us. And yeah, just take a couple minutes to fill it out, tell them your story, and ask them to support the bill. Same thing with social media. Some members of Congress are more responsive to social media than others, but to my knowledge, all of them, almost all of them, have some staff person who monitors their social media accounts, and they'll see it. If enough people are tweeting at them, and they'll see it. So that's what we're really asking you to do today. That's how you can help. It seems like a small thing. It's a small time commitment on your part, but it is not a small thing. It's a big thing we're asking you to do that would really help build momentum for this legislation. At the state level, talk to your state Medicaid departments. I would start with your director. If you can't reach that individual, find someone who will talk to you. I mean that. I don't mean to sound so desperate, but that's how you start conversations, right? Find someone who will listen to you and have a conversation at your state Medicaid department. If any of you have done advocacy with your state executive branch in the past, it doesn't hurt to talk to the top of the branch, someone in your governor's office. This is the kind of thing that if a governor ever decided to prioritize IMD waivers, they could certainly have it done quickly. But it doesn't need a governor's support. It just, because most governors don't get that far into the weeds of Medicaid policy. But still, it doesn't hurt. And then legislatures, if needed, can require, or at least put pressure on your Medicaid departments to apply for these waivers. If you do those things, we're going to make a big difference here. And we've got to get more waivers, and we've got to keep pressure on Congress to repeal the IMD exclusion. If advocates like us, advocates for severe mental illness treatment, better treatment, and then the people that are living with schizophrenia, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, other psychotic disorders, if we don't keep the pressure on policymakers, nothing's going to change. It's already the law. We're asking them to change something, and legislators usually don't do that unless you pressure them to do so. So with that, I know we have some questions. Happy to talk about them. Hopefully I can answer them. If not, then I'll be in touch. So please, Elizabeth, let's hear what people have. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm the communications associate, and I'll be asking some questions. So first, I'm going to try and get through all of them. We'll try and get it through as many as we have time for. So cool. The first question is just, can you really quickly explain what will change with the repeal of the IMD exclusion?
Yeah, sure. So right now, the way that Medicaid is structured in federal statute is that it says Medicaid shall pay for people who qualify and are enrolled in Medicaid shall pay for these services. And then there's a couple of exceptions way down in the law. There's some exceptions. One of them, which we didn't touch on today, says that Medicaid won't pay for people who are currently incarcerated. That's another controversial issue for maybe another time. But right under that paragraph, it says also will not pay for people who are patients in an institution for mental disease, or IMD. That's just an antiquated term that the government defines as a facility that specializes in psychiatric care with more than 16 inpatient beds. In other words, any psychiatric hospital, almost anywhere, almost any of them, have more than 16 beds, to be a facility that specializes and has the expertise in inpatient care for people with mental illness. So that paragraph I just mentioned, it's in the law that says Medicaid will not pay for this one thing. HR 2611 strikes that. There's two things. It strikes that paragraph. It just says that, the bill says we're going to remove that paragraph from the law. It is no longer the law if HR 2611 is passed by Congress and signed by the president. The other thing it does, though, which doesn't get as much attention, but is very important, is it would require states to report to Congress on what they're doing to improve their continuum of care for mental illness. Now, what that means exactly would be up to a federal agency to further define, but it's important that's in there. It shows that the people who drafted HR 2611 and its co-sponsors, they want states to know this is not just about the IMD exclusion. We have to make sure that we're having wraparound services, et cetera. But that part's a little vague. The specific part is it just strikes the paragraph from law that's causing all these problems we talked about today.
Cool. So as an experienced advocate, do you feel there is significant benefit in contacting representatives that are not our own as well? Or do representatives generally only pay attention to their specific constituents?
Speaking very generally, legislators, especially members of Congress, tend to pay attention only to their constituents. Now, there are exceptions to that, but speaking very generally, that's the case. The form that we have that we dropped in the chat here for this webinar, that I think some of you have already filled out, and I filled out with you here today. That will only send it to you. That's why it asks for your address. It will only send it to your member of Congress. We've found that's the most effective way when you're going to have an email blitz and you're trying to get a bunch of emails going to Congress at once. That's the most effective way. The exception is if you have some prior relationship and you know a member of Congress who's not your own. For years, I lived in Kentucky and I knew my member of Congress. And I knew a couple of the bordering districts as well. I knew them. I knew their staff. I wasn't a constituent, but I could still talk to them. So again, there are circumstances when it makes perfect sense, but generally speaking, the best use of your time is talk to your member of Congress because they tend to read emails from constituents.
Cool. And from the same person, if you don't want to do social media, is it still worth it to send a literal letter in the mail?
Yes. Yes, I don't. I will tell you, it's been a while, but when I was 18 years old, I interned at the district office of a congressman in rural Kentucky, and my job was to check the voicemail. And back then, again, this is a while back, we did have email. Email existed. I checked email and I read the letters, even the ones that were supposed to go to Washington. I would get those and summarize them and pass them up the chain of actual staff persons who work for the congressman. So yeah, someone's going to read that letter. Particularly, I mean, a letter is the simplest thing because the return address. They'll look. Some staff person looks at that and they see, oh, that's in the district. They probably don't even have to look it up. They know you're a constituent. So emails, social media, more effective these days. Well, no, they're much simpler and take less of your time. If you want to send a letter, by all means, if you're a constituent, send it to your member of Congress. Sure.
Great. And someone wrote that their state director stated that the reporting requirements were burdensome for the waiver. I guess the question is that true?
I'll say yes and no. My hesitation is because I don't know the person you spoke to at your state Medicaid department. I know that I have spoke to some state Medicaid departments who have told me that. And I think in most cases they were lazy. Personal opinion, because I'm passionate about, the state should have this waiver because it impacts the people that I work and advocate for. That's my bias. So I thought there was kind of a cop out because all Medicaid waivers have reporting requirements. It's part of that person's job to take care of that. I know that in states like Oklahoma, Utah, and Vermont, where these waivers are in operation and they're seeing good results already. Good results meaning they're getting people into using federal money to get people into inpatient care for longer periods of time when they need it and they need inpatient care. Those states, those people, I've talked to people who are in charge of the reporting requirements and getting the reporting to the federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they don't think it's burdensome. They think it's great because they're part of their job is helping people get on Medicaid, get health care and get treatment. So they think it's wonderful. They're not complaining about it in states where these things are working, but that may be because they had the proper attitude to want these waivers in the first place. That being said, if you're in a state that already has an SUD waiver, the added burden of getting the SMI waiver, the added burden of the reporting requirements is not that big a deal. And I think that's just a cop out. I don't know which your state that was in, but I think it's generally a cop out. I think it's an excuse to not have to do more work.
Okay, and then I just have one more if people want to throw some other questions in the chat or even just unmute yourself and ask, does the IMD apply to state mental health and psychiatric hospitals?
It depends on the state. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Generally, I mean, it's any hospital, any place that specializes in psychiatric care that has more than 16 beds is considered an IMD and therefore cannot use Medicaid funds without some sort of waiver or some loophole to the contrary. But it again depends on the state as far as whether your state hospitals count. In a lot of states, yes, they are IMDs. I mentioned Oklahoma earlier. I know because I've seen the numbers. They are using their waiver for payments of people who are in state hospitals. Whereas a state like Maryland, who is applying for a waiver and has one pending, all of their state hospitals are forensic, meaning that they're just for people who are facing or convicted of crimes. So not civil commitment, not voluntary care or patients, but just people involved in criminal justice. So for them, it's a moot question, whereas in your state, it may be a really relevant question. Generally, yes, they are IMDs, but it's very subjective.
Okay, that's all the questions I had. So unless anyone puts some
I will
more-
say, yeah, I don't, and if you already responded, Elizabeth, I apologize in advance, but I tried to ignore the questions as they're coming in. I tried to stay focused, but I did see someone ask about if we were going to get into the intricacies and background of what even is the IMD exclusion.
Yeah, you can go for
And
that.
did you respond to that? I'm happy. I'm not going to go into it. I was going to tell them to please reach out to me. Last slide here is, should have my email address. There it is. Email me, please. If you want to know more about the IMD, if you're here today and you thought this was going to be more background and more informative on what is the IMD, why should we care, how does it hurt the people we care about, please reach out to me because we have a previous webinar on YouTube and you can watch that. But if you want to get involved in advocacy in your state, or if you are a policymaker or have relationships with policymakers in your state, or you're a member of Congress, any of the above, email me and we'll talk. Elizabeth and Jeffrey know that I could talk about this for hours, just telling you the historical background of it. So I don't have to do all that, but just reach out to me by email, whoever asked that question, and I will fill you in. So that's all I have. Other than anything else, I look at this list of participants now for the first time. Several of you already have my contact info, but if you want to know more about this or anything else related to IMD exclusion, please reach out to me. Happy to talk to you. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for thank you for bearing with me on my how do I say this? I'm not great with technology. Couldn't figure out how to share a screen. Thank you all for bearing with me. Thank you, Elizabeth, for facilitating. Jeffrey, thank you for your valuable info on how people should be submitting letters and op-eds, because that's another avenue of advocacy that we could do. People in our world could be doing a whole lot more of.
Oh, sorry, I just saw someone ask if there's going to be a recording. We are going to put it up on YouTube, so you can look for that. And with that, yeah, I guess we'll end it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all so much.
See ya.